sure if you or Claudia is going to be sharing the slides.
I'm doing them.
Okay, great. Welcome, Johanna.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for having me. I do really appreciate being here, and obviously want to acknowledge all of you in your work, and the First Nations peoples of New Zealand, as well as Australia, where I live and work, as they're very central to the thinking and way of caring for people as whole, people connected to community and country and spirit. So I will share my slides and just walk gently through them, but just in the little room that I was in before, I had the privilege of meeting and understanding some of the work that you all do. And so I do hope that this session also looks after you. So when we think about whole people, we think about our patients often, or the people we're caring for, but we too are part of the system, and we are whole people too, deserving of care. So I'll just do the flick of putting my slides up, and then we'll go from there. Okay, and it's not, I intentionally leave this not in speaker mode because I like to visually see where I'm going next, which I can do more easily on Zoom, and I haven't worked out how to do on Teams. But just to introduce myself, yes, as Jane has done so lovely, my current role is actually writing curriculum for a new medical school that is going to be trauma-informed and integrate these concepts into how we care for doctors' well-being and patient well-being. And they have actually named my title after my idea, so I'm the whole person care lead, which is a real privilege that I'm experiencing at the moment. So I'll be talking about trauma-informed care as a healing-oriented approach using this concept sense of safety. But first of all, I just want to show that First Nations peoples in Australia, just as Maori here, have already named how they see whole people, and I really want to recognize that and acknowledge that. And First Nations academics were involved in my doctoral work and have influenced its work as well. But I also wanted to note that this 2012, I think, image came alongside these 9 principles and really have trauma and violence-informed care embedded in them. So the idea of self-determination and of human rights, and the impact of historical trauma on the First Nations communities in Australia, and how important culture and kinship and connection to strengths are as part of understanding health. But the key things in this image are the idea of a relational self that connects out to community, back to history, down into the roots of where somebody lives, and is influenced by determinants of health that are around that person, and is expressed and experienced. So these very invisible things that are part of what make up health. I recently gave a talk to a group of clinicians working in women's refuges, and I brought to them this quote. So I also want us to acknowledge and notice, as we're thinking about the people that we care for, and this idea that they're often unseen and alone, on paths that they have to go underground in our communities in order to receive help. And so it's this community that need to be seen and heard in our work. In Australia, we had a new childhood maltreatment study done in 2023. So it's like a modern version of the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, which I hope you all know about. And I just thought I would raise the ideas of the prevalence of these issues, which you care for every day, and you don't really need anybody to remind you about. But the idea that, for me, the most kind of hard-hitting stat in there is that 40% of Australians, 39.6% of Australians identify having experienced domestic and family violence prior to the age of 18. And there are other types of abuse mentioned there, but I just want to notice neglect, how few cases of neglect are noticed in this study, and I think that's more an issue of how we don't notice neglect rather than that it's not there, because neglect often precedes many other forms of harm that our community experience, being treated as though you're not a human worth caring for. So today I just want to shift our language a little bit in trauma-informed care. I know you have already had the sense of the shift from a kind of medicalized disease or deficit-focused way of seeing people, like, well, what's wrong with you? Can I diagnose you? To what's happened to you, acknowledging that people have lived through great adversity and have things in their life story that even they don't know have been harming them and causing them to harm. To this second wave trauma-informed care that's around building sense of safety. And the shift is really intentional because the what happened to you phrase, although in a way it takes away blame from the sufferer, what it does is overly focus on the perpetrator as the definer of the next parts of a person's life, and shifts attention in a way to harm and to deficit and to danger when we are trying to help somebody learn how to be safe in the world again. And so hence I bring this idea that what we would love for people to have when they come to see us is to leave with a growing sense of an embodied, felt sense of being able to be safe in the world. And a lot of your work is doing things that are practically part of that story, things like making sure their housing is safe and they're not living with somebody who's currently abusing them, and they have safe people to go to and safe memories and places that are okay for their bodies to be at ease in. So there's some new questions I would suggest that we want to be asking, and some of these are not relevant in the immediate acute situation where somebody's still living with danger, because actually over attention to comfort and safety when you're in current danger is also not safe. And so this is very much led by the person who's experiencing the situation. And for those of us who are helping, we are meant to really notice how much risk is currently here. So how on guard does this person need to be? And therefore, how I sort of titrate our attention to things like, how are we helping you to sense that you're safe? So through the talk today, I thought I'd just bring some practical tools that are also really useful for us as people who care to look after ourselves. But they're also things that you can use in a moment with anybody that you're caring for to help them to shift attention away from looking at the danger and towards being able to see things that are safe. And being able to see things more in perspective if that danger is not current and not right now. So the first one's called a physiological sigh. I don't know how many of you have already come across this, but it's basically trying to use our nervous system to switch our attention and our bodily arousal, and using both our vagus and our phrenic nerve. Our phrenic nerve controls our diaphragm. And so it's a process of taking in 2 breaths and then doing a big sigh outwards. And depending on where you are, you might like to try it with me, where it goes, and the long breath out is part of it. So 2 breaths in, and we'll do it one more time. So this is an interrupter of panic, and it can be used to help a parent in the moment. It can be used to teach children as well. And of course, it can be used for you as in your work on when you get back in the car. Just have a couple of these before you get on your way to help your body be calm. So now I'm just going to shift into some attention to what healthy relationships look like. And that is because I want to help frame what does loss of safety look like and what do human beings need to feel safe. And so out of my doctoral work came these three things. One is that we need freedom. We need our own integrity, our bodily integrity and our moral integrity to go where we want to go, to believe what we want to believe, and to, be ourselves without anybody invading us. So that's one element of being safe that we often notice when it's because it's a more obvious thing sometimes when somebody's being invaded physically, but we may miss the times they're being invaded in other ways with demands that are unreasonable or expectations that are too heavy, like a child being given a task that's usually done by an adult, for example. The second one is our sense of clarity or coherence, that our world makes sense. And in the Scandinavian countries, they actually use something called sense of coherence as a public health measure. So that's the idea that my world is manageable and comprehensible, and that when those two things aren't there, health is affected. And so that's around being able to trust, being able to believe people, having honest communication, not being tricked. So this is where gaslighting comes in, because it's interrupting our ability to be clear and have coherence between what we're seeing and hearing and what's happening inside us. But it also is where injustice fits, because when somebody is treated unjustly, it's fundamentally confusing that one person would be treated in one way and another person another way. And so it fits in those spaces around betrayals and ways that people are harmed through injustice. And then the third one is that human beings need connection. We need belonging. We need to know where we fit in a community. And so things that destroy that, like marginalization, ostracism, racism, but also someone being excluded or ghosted or given the silent treatment. And inside the home, people might be treated as though they're not even there, like they don't exist. And we now know that isolating children in what we call nonverbal emotional abuse changes their brains. And so these three things become like touchstones that we want to make sure somebody is experiencing in their life. And if we think about healthy relationships, some of the ways these might express themselves are inside that sense of freedom is I have fair responsibility, and there's playful flexibility, and I can be myself, which is what differentiation is. And the tone in those relationships is that I encourage you to be you, and I can be me. In the sense of clarity is that there's genuine trust, and when I make an apology, I'm actually taking accountability for that. It's not sort of a kind of confusing and maybe untrue or kind of betraying kind of a apology, and that we have clear boundaries between us, and the tone of those relationships is around honesty. And then with belonging, there's this sense of generosity where we give to one another and we are responsive to one another and we're reliably kind to one another. And the tone of those relationships is that we comfort one another about the ups and downs of life. So with that background, I wonder if you could just have a little think. What does losing this look like? And I have started to have quite a wide view of that word trauma, because the original definition of the word trauma that came in through the psychiatric language was built around the Vietnam War and naming people who'd been in the sight of life-threatening situations or had them happen to them themselves, And since then, we've had sexual assault added to those kind of traumas that are considered trauma in the psychiatric world. But for those of us who are working in prevention and in building healthy community and who are working in healing, then anything that affects somebody that destroys their sense of each of these three things is relevant to us. And so we need quite an inclusive way of understanding what traumatizes a human being. And so I go back to the original definition of the word trauma. It was a Greek word and it meant wound. And our dictionaries call it a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. I think that's more attuned to what everyday life is like when we are overwhelmed by something in everyday life. And then the other descriptions there come from different professions that usually don't get the chance to define this. So Louis Cozolino is a neuropsychologist, and he talks about it being when our arousal is so high, our coping mechanisms are overwhelmed by something we've perceived to be threatening. So he's got a few elements of that that are really important. So it cannot be decided from outside whether something has been perceived to be a threat. And John Allen, who works with a lot of borderline work in complex trauma in London, he talks about being left psychologically alone with something. So that's that real loss of connection. And Porges, who has a beautiful quote, which he calls, he says, the goal of civilization is to be safe in another person's arms. And so he calls trauma the idea that we thought we were going to be safe with someone and it didn't happen. And then Peter Levine, who works in sort of neurobiology, he talks about things that impact our neural system in a way that's too much, too fast, or too soon. So this, I think those of you who work with children would really relate to these, and you might already have heard some of these definitions. But I find them really helpful to position what we mean by trauma. And so what that then means when we look at this image is that we have a wider view of what this thing that we call trauma and violence is. And it's this idea that things that can invade, exploit, entrap, or demand, things that confuse, betray, divide, or deceive, and things that disconnect or neglect or violate my intimacy or marginalize. And in this belonging one, I would also include people who pretend to be close to me, who pretend to be my hero, pretend to be safe. And then I discover that they're not. And so I actually never had quality connection in the first place with that person. I have led a team writing a paper on coercive control for the Australian Journal of General Practice, and you might be interested because some of these concepts are embedded into that paper, and there's a QR code there for you, and these slides will be available as a PDF to you afterwards. Those who talk about adversity in childhood, obviously their original research came from Felitti and Ander back in 1998. And since then, a key researcher, neuropsych researcher, Martin Tischer, has added a couple of things to these. But I would categorize them again around this idea of those three things. So connection is lost in isolation when you're neglected or emotionally or physically, or you're given that silent treatment I mentioned. It's lost when somebody invades you in physical abuse or sexual abuse, or when you are hurt by a peer. And it is there when you lose clarity, when you have emotional abuse, or you witness your own siblings being hurt in a very confusing setup. And then we have loss of a safe caregiver. That's in that absent parent, but intoxicated, mentally unwell, incarcerated, or if you see one parent hurting the other, you've lost a safe caregiver. And so again, that's probably adding more to our sense of isolation. How are you all going? Are you settled and okay as we go along? The next little piece I wanted to suggest is some new words to, is that Claire with a hand up or okay, Claire with a thumbs up, thank you. The next little piece is to just maybe suggest some new language, including some suggestions from Australian First Nations elders in how we name the types of trauma that there are. And often the language of PTSD is used because it's been entrenched into the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. In that way, I mentioned through influence from the Vietnam War. But that's really just the top of the iceberg above the water that we can see. And there's quite a rare scenario where someone would have no problems before they had a big traumatic thing, and then they have no problems afterwards, so they can have a post. Usually, most people are coping with these things within relationships. They get overwhelmed by them, and then they have to keep on managing those long-term relationships, especially if they're their own family. And so to think of these things as potentially that's a very small bit of the trauma group is those ones that who have experiences that they re-experience, they avoid what happened, and they are vigilant, like after a car accident, for example. And there are one-offs like that we do have in the home or in the military, and even with sexual assault if someone was not harmed before. But on the whole, most people have experience of being in patterns of control or ongoing adversity, and those are often there while the child's brain is developing, their sense of self is developing, their capacity to trust other people and know where they fit in the world is developing. And so that group we call complex trauma. And even though the ICD-10 and 11 has named CPTSD, complex PTSD, it still doesn't capture some of the intensity that the original writers about complex trauma have in terms of people's altered perception, where they lose sense of time, lose sense of relationship to their body, lose sense of understanding story in a coherent way, including their own life story. And so I would highly recommend using the term complex trauma for that group of people. And then the last group, which are often called intergenerational trauma, that are treated over and over, generation after generation, in dehumanizing ways through colonization and objectification. As though women, we would experience both of those things if we can in that community that's been colonized. That Uncle Richard Fedjo from Larrakia country calls this compound trauma. Instead of it being implying intergenerational, which he believes says one generation gives it to the next, it's more that it's one generation experiences after the next, one after the other, and that changes experience of hope and spirit and culture and connection for a community. We think of it this way, that the orange is that you have an okay childhood and then something happens to you and you get better, but even if you have a second one, it triggers it again, and you heal, but not all the way back to your childhood. And if you're in complex trauma, you're living through it as a child, and then you have an event of a car accident, and your capacity to come back down to normal is reduced, and then of course you can get triggered again. And then for those who have lived with it from before they were born in their community, then it's this wider white kind of sense where they're carrying so much more of the trauma in their community. So just to reiterate that there are different ways this is expressed in people's lives. Once you have complex trauma, you have the addition of difficulty regulating your mood, difficulty knowing who you are, and informing relationships, and then altered states of consciousness around how you connect to your body, etc. And then in that compound trauma, there's the extra layer of impact on culture, hope, and connection. So I've just placed those in different ways for you to see. So let's just have another look at this sense of what can calm us. So that's the idea of 3 things we can see, hear, or sense with touch. And I won't make us do all of these straight right now, but they are things where by naming what we see, hear, and feel with touch, we are helping our body to integrate and settle where we are, because we have to see it, take it into our brain, give it a language word, say it out with our motor nerves and things around our mouth and throat to speak it. And in that process, we are helping our brain to reconnect to itself after it's been distressed. And so, and it's going seeing from a distance, hearing from a bit closer, sensing with touch. And so we're slowly calming ourselves down in a setting. So just to shift now to talking a little bit about sense of safety, I started asking new questions in my clinical work, and I'd been caring for a lady for about 3 years who I knew had had something really bad happen at home, because and we did not focus on what happened, but the patterns of how she presented revealed to me that something really bad had happened. She couldn't tell me many things. She often was mute. But after about 3 years, I decided to ask her a new question. And that question was, oops, I've forgotten which slide it was. That question was to say, what was there anywhere in your childhood where you felt safe? And her answer was on the school bus. And when asked what it felt like on the school bus, she said, like a deep breath. And what that taught me, that one question where I was looking for the strength, I'm looking for, was there anywhere in your childhood that you felt safe? She described this place that many other children don't feel safe on the school bus, and she didn't mention a school teacher or an auntie or a grandma or a coach or anybody outside of the school bus who could help her. And so that immediately gives me lots of information about how much she has wrestled and struggled through. But it also gives me a sense that she has experienced a tiny bit of this thing that we're wanting her to experience more of, like a deep breath, and how physical that experience is. And those who are studying microbiology of threat and stress and how social determinants of health change biology, they talk a lot about this embodied experience of threat. When I asked in my research, what does sense of safety mean to you? People describe these really whole pictures. They wanted to describe themselves in connection with somebody else and in engaging with their context. How safe do I feel to engage here? How safely connected to you do I feel? And it was only in the presence of self, other, and the context that they could tell you whether or not they felt a sense of safety. And so I'd inadvertently discovered that asking about sensing of safety gave me the chance that the person themselves would tell me what was helping them to feel safe and what wasn't. And it was a whole person experience. They wouldn't be able to separate that I feel a sense of safety without knowing who the other people in the room are, or without knowing what they were being asked to do. And so it became a kind of shorthand way to see a whole person. And as a GP, I've been fascinated with how we see whole people and how bits of people get left out of stories, because our medical framework looks so much at their bodies and doesn't listen so much to their inner life and their past experience. And so this became a little tool, is to think that sensation is integrative. Our whole bodies connect to themselves. And just because we label something self or other, the body isn't doing that. It's just sensing where it is in space and working out how to do that. And we know that bodies take a load, and the more and more load on it, the more likely the kind of engine work of the body doesn't work anymore. And there are researchers who talk about this concept called allostatic load. So allostatic load is that our health is set at a kind of set point that is homeostasis, where we regulate our temperature and we regulate how we manage our attention and cope with life. But when we have to adapt to something, we get a new set point. And I often give the example of my knees, that when I've put on weight, my knees need to get stronger. The muscles around my knees get stronger. But at some point, the muscles being strong doesn't protect my knee cartilage, and I can get cartilage damage if I put on more weight. And so that idea that people can get allostatic overload, where their bodies then start to show disease as a result of the many things that their body's been holding as they're impacted by the feeling not safe in their world. And this is just a picture of how many types of biological work is being done to try and understand the links between life story and bodily health. So my work asked people what causes safety, what causes threat, and how do you sense that you're safe, and then mapped that onto a map that is a way of seeing a whole person through the lens of sensing that you're safe or sensing threat. And so that means we're interested in that person's environment, where they're living, their finances, the politics, the amount of racism in that environment, even the climate, and obviously in the First Nations approach, is connection to country, and experiences on land that matter. Then social climate is anywhere somebody lives, learns, works, plays, or online. What's it like there? How much hope is there? How much aggression? How much addiction? Because all of those things influence how safe someone is, and how much belonging, how much connection, how much curiosity and enthusiasm is in that group. And then in personal relationships, who's there, who's missing, what are those relationships like? And in our body, things like sleep and pain and big emotions, as well as other sicknesses and illnesses. And then in our inner experience, thoughts, but also how I perceive things, what I pay attention to, what I dream of in the future, what my mind keeps thinking about, and experiences and emotion, the feelings is in there as well. And then our sense of self, how do I treat myself? How do I talk to myself? Who am I? And then meaning and spirit. Where do I find hope? How do I manage regret? How do I see myself in the world? What gives me purpose? Those kind of questions. So each of those layers are part of a person encountering their world. They're all interconnected. They're all inside a whole. Not one of them could be picked out and said, this is how we know what's going on for a person. And they can all be impacted by somebody who's trying to coerce another person. The other good thing about being in wholes is that we can calm ourselves from the top down with a reassuring thought or belief or image or words, and we can calm ourselves from the bottom up through our bodies. And we instinctively know that with babies when we sing them lullabies, because we rock them, which is their nervous system coming from below, and we sing songs in a tone of voice that's again a soothing part of the nervous system. And then the words of the songs have meanings that are meant to be calming and settling for a person. And so this sense that we can be bringing calm from people's physical environment and the way we engage with their bodies, and through the rest of their beliefs, their sense of self, their meaning, their inner experiences. And so a third one of these is connecting to me, the idea that my hands can touch one another. And one side can mean myself now and myself when I was a child, or my feeling strong and my feeling not so strong. And that's just getting them to touch one little finger at a time can help someone to settle and calm and bring connection across the midline. Things like knitting and crocheting also do the same task. So now just a last little piece, which is bringing a bit more detail about sense of safety, is that it's built on the work of Judith Herman, who said that the first stage of healing from trauma is establishing safety. The second stage is remembrance and mourning. And the third is reconnecting to ordinary life. And I would argue that at each layer, you need safety. You need to build it, then you need safety to grieve, and you need enough safety to grow and reconnect to life. So safety is a key element of being well. And in fact, psychiatrists in Toronto who go to the bedside have decided that feeling secure when you're frightened is more important than feeling healthy to many people. And so hence, if I feel safer when I'm smoking, I'm not going to give it up. Or if I feel safer when I let somebody have their own way around me, then I will not pursue the other ways of being. And so helping someone to feel safe is a key direction we can take in our care. Maslow said everything looks less important than safety and protection. And then there's some modern theories in this space. So Maslow, there's one called social safety theory, which talks about how our threat in social settings is so important to our well-being. There's the polyvagal theory, which is from Stephen Porges, about how our biology changes when we're feeling safe. And then the generalized unsafety theory is that we're born not feeling safe, and adult parenting is all about helping somebody to feel safe. So there's ways that we do that, and these are the dynamics you can read about in my work. And there's ways that we as clinicians help that to happen by the way we interconnect with another person. And so those are the attitudes and skills of this framework. I have recently published also an Australian Journal of General Practice on trauma-informed approaches that we call understanding and caring for trauma in general practice, which kind of brings together a number of different models of trauma-informed care. And my sense of safety framework has these concepts of that we have a goal when we want someone to feel safe. We want them to be safe enough to be in their environment, safe enough to belong in their social climate, safe enough to connect in their relationships, safe in their body with a sense of calm in their body, safe on the inside in their inner experiences, safe enough to grow in their sense of self, and safe enough to give in their spirit. If you want some more resources on this, my website has some resources that are for clinicians to look after your own sense of safety. And there is a course on sense of safety, an online course, which I priced very reasonably, hoping that you would have the chance to do it. And I will stop sharing.
Wow, thank you, Johanna. That was amazing. I love the practical tips that you shared with us.
That's good.
Yeah. And the questions. I think sometimes having a different question that puts us in a different space, say,